Rapture becomes her. Chapter 12. It was simple happenstance that Geoffrey and Answorth learned of Anne's departure for Parkham House. As she did frequently, Rosie's parents, Sally's sister, visited at the Birches that Thursday afternoon. Seated at Mrs. Spaulding's scrubbed table in the kitchen, drinking tea and laughing and chatting with Sally and the others. Rosie heard in passing that Mrs. Ann Townsend had left that morning to stay for several weeks at Parkham House. Returning to the village in the late afternoon, she stopped at the Ram's Head to see if she was needed for work that evening. She wasn't, but she spied Kelsey sitting at a small table in the corner and joined him. The two of them talked desultorily for several minutes before Rosie mentioned her visit to the Birches and the news that Mrs. Ann Townsend had gone to stay with the squire's mother at Parkham House. Kelsey immediately perked up and wondered how best to use the information Rosie had so innocently passed on to him. While not privy to the plans of the squire and Answorth, he was aware that the two men were up to no good, and that whatever they were scheming to do involved Anne Townsend. Knowing of the fortune and the offering for Answorth once he had secured a respectable bride, and being of a like mind, Kelsey had long ago guessed the method Answorth would use to gain the hand of a woman who spurned his suit. A natural-born snoop, Kelsey had known for months about the farmhouse used for Geoffrey's assignations. Since his dismissal with scant money, except the pittance Geoffrey passed him now and then, he had broken into the place and had been sleeping in one of the bedrooms. This morning he'd been startled awake by the arrival of Geoffrey and Answorth, and had barely managed to escape undetected out of the bedroom window at the side of the house. Finding the horses concealed in the stables and noting the saddlebags bulging with wine and foodstuff and other items, Kelsey had chosen a hiding place nearby and hung around watching. Clearly they were preparing to use the house, and he didn't think that it would be Geoffrey meeting a willing wench for a night of frolic. Answorth's presence was particularly telling. After Rosie left the tavern, Kelsey sat back and considered what he knew and how best to use it. It was a good bet that the squire and Answorth had no idea that Anne Townsend had slipped away, and he wondered how grateful they'd be to learn of her departure. Only one way to find out. He decided, rising to his feet. Neither Geoffrey nor Answorth was happy when Kelsey strolled into the old kitchen at the farmhouse some time later. Kelsey observed that little had been done in the kitchen, but there were now several bottles of wine set out, and food and plates, utensils and glasses scattered across the dusty table against the far wall. The bedroom, he thought, with a tangle in his privates, was most likely to reveal the majority of their efforts, such as clean sheets on the well-worn mattress. Answorth was fussy that way. "What are you doing here?" demanded Geoffrey. "I told you to lay low, and that I'd see that all was right with you as soon as I could." Kelsey shot him a look of dislike. "And in the meantime I'm reduced to damn near beggary. I'm tired of waiting. I want some money, and I'll discover something that should fill these hands with gold." Glancing at the items on the table, he smiled nastily and added, "especially if all these preparations are in anticipation of the arrival of the young Mrs. Townsend." Geoffrey stiffened. "What do you mean?" "Why, only that I have news that you might like to hear for a price." His eyes cold and considering, Answorth asked, "And what makes you think that we are interested in the activities of Mrs. Townsend?" "Do you take me for a fool?" Kelsey sneered. "The lady does not want to marry you, but you need a bride, and there's only one sure way of gaining her consent, if you have a stomach strong enough for it." Answorth studied his fingernails. "Sure, suppose you are right," he drawled. "Why do you think what you know will help us?" Kelsey grinned, showing yellowed and missing teeth. Because I can save you wasted effort. How? Asked Jeffrey. Pay me and you'll find out. Ainsworth studied Kelsey for a long minute, and then, reaching into his vest pocket, he extracted a gold coin. He tossed it at Kelsey, who caught it in one smooth movement. If what you have to say is valuable, Ainsworth said, you can keep that, but if it is not, it's worth it, Kelsey said, the coin disappearing under his clothing. Only after he had hidden the gold away did it occur to Kelsey that Miss Emily or that old witch, Mrs. Cornelia, might have been willing to pay much more to know about Geoffrey and Ainsworth's activities at the farmhouse. He brightened, realizing that there was nothing to stop him from leaving here and taking his chances with the ladies. I'm still waiting to learn if I get good value for my money, said Ainsworth impatiently, walking toward the old stone fireplace. Stopping just a few paces from Kelsey, he asked, What do you know? Kelsey repeated what he learned from Lucy, enjoying the consternation and dismay that flooded Geoffrey's face. Ainsworth's expression revealed nothing. Good God, burst out Geoffrey despairingly. What are we to do? If they left this morning, we have no chance of overtaking them. And I wouldn't even try if they left only minutes ago, snapped Ainsworth. Not unless you want to put a bullet through your brother's heart and attempt an abduction in broad daylight on a public road. No longer interested in Ainsworth and Geoffrey, now that he had some money and eager to reach the purchase, Kelsey said, Think I'll be on my way. Wait, said Ainsworth. You've earned this. He tossed another coin in Kelsey's direction, deliberately miscalculating the distance. The coin fell and danced across the worn stone floor. Kelsey bent to pick up the coin, and Ainsworth moved with the speed of a vapor, snatching up a hefty piece of firewood from the neat stack on the hearth and swinging it down viciously on the back of Kelsey's head. Kelsey fell face down without a sound. Ignoring Geoffrey's horrified gasp, Ainsworth kicked Kelsey over onto his back. Kelsey was still breathing, and Ainsworth bent over and coolly and methodically hit him several more times with the heavy piece of wood. Once when Kelsey was dead, then Ainsworth straightened and tossed the wood onto the hearth. Geoffrey took one look at what had once been Kelsey's face, and his stomach lurched. He ran out of the kitchen, barely making it outside, before he was violently ill. Only when he was certain his stomach was empty did he return inside. Wiping his mouth and keeping his eyes averted from Kelsey's body, he asked in shaking tones, Was that necessary? Yes, replied Answay, not even breathing hard after his exertions. I wasn't willing to run the risk that he wouldn't run to your cousin and great aunt with news of our activities. Putting the body with the toe of his foot, he said maliciously. I'll leave it to you to dispose of the body. Geoffrey opened his mouth to protest, but the look on Answay's face stopped him. Swallowing his gorge, he approached Kelsey's body, and gingerly taking hold of one arm, began to pull the body from the room. Kelsey hadn't been a big man, but he was dead weight, and it was several minutes before Geoffrey had the body out of the house and hidden beneath some brush behind the stables. Returning to the kitchen, still pale and shaken, he found Ainsworth sitting in one of the rickety wooden chairs, sipping a glass of wine from one of the bottles they brought with them. Helping himself to a glass, Geoffrey tossed it off in one swallow. What are we to do now? All is lost. Ainsworth flashed him a contemptuous glance. No, all is not lost. His eyes went dark with fury. She will not be the bride I wanted, but I'm afraid that your cousin Emily will just have to do. Geoffrey gaped at him. You're mad if you think you can force Emily to do anything. She will fair ruin, Ainsworth said carelessly, as much as the next woman. Geoffrey looked doubtful. That may be, but she's going to make you an intolerable wife. Ainsworth looked at him, and Geoffrey was chilled at what he saw in Ainsworth's eyes. She only has to live, Ainsworth said softly, long enough for me to gain my fortune. After that, he took a sip of his wine and smiled. After that, I feel my bride will suffer a fatal incident. Geoffrey's eyes dropped. He wasn't, he told himself, a bad man, and if it hadn't been for some unfortunate losses at the gaming tables, The majority to Answorth, he wouldn't have found himself in this situation. He had been perfectly willing to help Answorth marry Anne, but Kelsey's death wasn't something he would ever have condoned if his opinion had been asked. Jeffrey wasn't fond of Emily, but he retained enough family loyalty to be unhappy contemplating her cold-blooded murder. Staring into his empty glass, he wished miserably he never agreed to Answorth's terms, and that he never invited the man to the breeches. Aware that Jeffrey was having second thoughts, Answorth said, "We only have to change our plans slightly." "I don't want to waste any more time," he looked thoughtful. "In fact, I think we should quietly return to your house and spy out the lay of the land. It's possible that luck will be on our side, and we can snatch your cousin without anyone ever realizing we have ever been on the grounds." He smiled. "She'll just disappear and later reappear as my bride." Jeffrey didn't appear enthusiastic, and guessing that the murder of Kelsey had disturbed him. Answorth said with suspect and sincerity, "I know what happened was a shock to you. I'm sorry about Kelsey's death, but the fewer people that know about our being here, the better. With Kelsey all gone, we two are the only ones who know we have been here, and I just as soon keep it that way." Anne's wife was wrong. Someone else knew that they were at the farmhouse. Sam Gates and his good friend, the cobbler's son, Billy Ford. The two boys, when able to escape from the parental eye, trampled at will through the countryside, and the stables at the abandoned farmhouse was a favorite place of theirs to hunt rats, with Billy's small terrier Tiger. About midday, when they slipped into the stables of the Eagle dog, they'd been astonished to find a pair of horses standing tied to an alleyway in the center of the building. Sam recognized the squire's horse, an elegant bay gelding with one white hind foot. His father had replaced a thrown shoe only a few days ago. A complete set of new shoes had been put on Answorth's dapper gray gelding the same day, so Sam had no trouble identifying the second horse. Hearing the squire and Answorth's voices approaching, Sam and Billy grabbed Tiger, and the two boys and dog scooted out the back of the stables through a loose board. The presence of the squire and his friend at the abandoned farmstead was notable for and of a curious nature. Sam and Billy tied the horse a short distance away and returned to watch the two men from their hiding place in a small patch of woods off to the side of the barn. The boys observed the squire and Answorth making several trips from the stables to the house carrying various items. After a while, the boys grew bored and wandered back to the dog, deciding to ask the vicar if he would let them hunt in his stables. There wouldn't be as much sport since the vicar kept a half-dozen or so cats around the place, but they might be able to find an unwary rat or two. It was late in the day by the time Sam made his way to the Crown, where he knew that at this hour he would find his father enjoying a well-deserved tankard of ale. Entering the inn, he found his father sitting at a table with Jeb Brown and Mrs. Gilbert. As Sam approached knowing grown boys, Mrs. Gilbert smiled and said, "Go into the kitchen and have Flora and one of the girls fix you a sandwich." Grinning, he said, "Thank you. I'm fair starved to death," and disappeared into the back of the inn. He reappeared several minutes later with crumbs on his chin and an impressive milk mustache framing his mouth, indicating he'd been fed well. As was his wont, he settled into the remaining empty chair and half dozing listening to the conversation of the adults. Sam was almost asleep, but he jerked wide awake when Mrs. Gilbert said, "There's no telling what the squire and that unpleasant friend of his are capable of doing. At least we don't have to worry about them right now. When I saw Walker in the village yesterday, he mentioned that they were going to New Haven today. But they didn't go to New Haven," Sam said innocently. Three pairs of narrow adult eyes quivered in his direction. He swallowed and muttered, "Well, at least they weren't there this afternoon. Me and Billy saw them out at the old Goddard place earlier today." "And what were you doing at the Goddard place?" Caleb asked in a tone that told Sam he better have a good reason for having been at the deserted farmstead. Earnestly, Sam said, "We were only going to hunt rats in the barn with Billy's dog." Caleb grunted and Sam breathed easier. "When did you see them?" asked Mrs. Gilbert, frowning. Sam hunched a shoulder. "Don't know the time, but it was this afternoon. Billy had to wait for his dad until nearly noon, and it was after that. That place had been standing empty for years," observed Jeb. "Can't imagine it would hold any interest for the squire and his friend. What were they doing?" "I don't know," Sam said. "Their horses was in the stables and they had brought some things in their saddlebags that they took into the house. Apologetically, he said, me and Billy got bored watching them, and so we walked on over to the vicar's and he let us hunt in the stables." His face brightened. "Tiger got 3 rats." Vicar was pleased. Caleb, trailed by a lagging Sam, left a few minutes later. Alone at the table, Mrs. Gilbert looked at Jeb. "You still think of shoving off tonight after dark?" "Barometer hadn't budged in a few days," Jeb admitted, "but my bad knee is starting to ache. Kept me awake half the night." Jeb's bad knee was proven to be an excellent indicator of the weather in the past, and knowing that if it was bothering him, that there most likely be a storm blowing, and before too many more days went by, Mrs. Gilbert nodded wisely. "Storm coming." "Yup, I believe so. If you're selling tonight, you'll have to see Miss Emily first," Mrs. Gilbert said, thinking aloud. "Might be a good thing," she added. "When you see her, you tell her what young Sam just told us." Thought crossed my mind, his expression troubled. Jeb said, "I wonder what they were up to out at the Goddard place. Seems suspicious like them being there, especially since they're supposed to have been in New Haven today." Which is why Mrs. Gilbert said briskly, rising to her feet, "You'll tell Miss Emily when you see her." Emily and Cornelia spent the afternoon packing what they would need for the first few days at Windmere. Emily was still restrained, resistant to the idea, unable to take seriously the notion that Answorth would substitute her in place of Anne. Every time she tried to renew the argument, Cornelia would stop her with a sharp look and a grim question. "Do you really want to take the chance?" Making a face, Emily returned to her packing, thinking that Cornelia was overreacting. While the ladies were busy packing, Barnaby sent a message by Tom, the footman, to Windmere, stating that he and Lamb were returning home and requesting that his carriage be driving over to pick them up late that afternoon. To the stable at the Birches, he sent word to have his and Lamb's horses saddled and ready to leave. Lamb had everything packed, and the valise is sitting by the front door within a matter of a few hours. Such was not the case with Emily and Cornelia, since neither lady was confident that Geoffrey wouldn't burn their belongings when he discovered they left. They ended up with considerably more things than originally planned. With little to do but wait, Barnaby paced, impatient for the news that the women were finally packed, and that the coach had arrived from Windmere. Geoffrey and Answorth may have gone to New Haven, but weren't expected back until well into the evening. But Barnaby didn't want to take any chances on them returning unexpectedly. The sooner they were gone from the Birches and at Windmere, the better he would like it. Excuse me. Emily and Cornelia managed to cram everything they could not bear to leave behind the Geoffrey's tender mercies into 2 rather alarmingly large trunks and an equally large pair of bandboxes. Once the 2 trunks were muscled down the stairs into the entry hall and the bandboxes placed on top of them, everyone breathed easier. With Lamb in the front of the house on the lookout for the coach, Barnaby and the 2 women were closer in the small green salon at the rear of the house. Conversation was sporadic, and there were long stretches of silence. The 3 of them were waiting tensely for the news that the coach had arrived. A tap on the door brought everyone to their feet, but when Walker entered the room, he looked at Emily and said apologetically, "No, the coach has not arrived, but there is our friend of yours waiting to see you in the kitchen." Emily immediately guessed the identity of her visitor and the reason for the visit. Blessing the coach delayed, giving Barnaby and Cornelia a quick smile. She said, "I'll only be a moment." When Barnaby looked ready to object, she added, "It is important Walker will stay right by my side. I'll be quite safe." Grabbing her blue and oyster silk and velvet reticule, she slipped into the hall. Shutting the door behind her, Emily asked, "Is it Jeb? He's going to sail tonight?" Walker nodded, his face troubled. and he was full of news of the squire and Mrs. Answell. They are not in New Haven, but have been busy out the old Godot place. Sam saw them there this afternoon. Barely surprising the gas, Emily said. So that's where they intended to take Anne. There was no time for further conversation, and with Walker at her heels, her fingers clutching the reticule, Emily sped toward the kitchen. This afternoon had been so frantic that it was only when she put the money for the next shipment into her reticule just before leaving her room to walk with Cornelia to the Green Salon had she given a thought to Jeb's impending trip or the smuggling enterprise at all. Barnaby might have thought she was unduly quiet in the Green Salon, but Emily had been thinking hard about the ramifications her removal to Windermere would have on the smuggling operation. Mrs. Gilbert and the others needed to know what was happening. Jeb's arrival tonight wouldn't have been better timed, and she was relieved that she could kill two birds with one stone. He had the money, and he could tell Mrs. Gilbert of the removal to Windermere. All of the Summers knew what was going on, but they all maintained the fiction that Jeb had merely come for a friendly visit with Jane, his niece and lone remaining housemaid at the Birches. When Emily rushed into the kitchen, Jeb rose to his feet, kissed Jane on her cheek, and said that he'd be off now once he had a private word with Miss Daylight was fading as Emily and Jeb stepped out the kitchen door and headed toward the stables where Jeb had left Caleb's horse. As they walked, their heads close together, Emily thought brought Jeb current with the happiness at the Birches. Even though they were alone, they both kept their voices just above a whisper, always wary of being overheard. Make certain Mrs. Gilbert knows that we will be at Windermere before you leave tonight, she ordered as they rounded the curve and the house disappeared from sight. The stables were hidden beyond another curve, just ahead and at this particular stretch of road. Between the two curves they went out of sight from anyone at the stables or the house. Stopping in the middle of the narrow road, she opened her reticule and hastily handed Jeb the small leather pouch. It disappeared inside his worn brown jacket. What if you're needed unexpectedly? Jeb asked quietly, worry in his eyes. How will we let you know? Can't have Sam slipping into the kitchen at Windermere with a message for you. Emily considered his concerns. They were valid. Smuggling was an uncertain business, and beyond knowing the tides, wasn't ever any set timetable for Jed's return and the unloading of the contraband goods. The only constant was that the smuggled items from France were unloaded on the moonless nights or to avoid the revenues in the midst of a storm if possible. While still at sea, using the lantern, Jeb was able to signal his approach to Mr. Meek, whose small cottage was situated on the chalk bluff above the pounding surf. Once Mr. Meek was alerted to Jeb's impending arrival. Having acknowledged Jeb's signal with his own lantern, he hastened to the crowd and Mrs. Gilbert. She spread the word amongst the small crew that helped with the unloading and the transportation to London. As their leader, Emily was always there to lend a hand where needed. With the loyal band of servants at the Birches benefiting from the smuggling operation, it was simple enough for Sam to get her word that a landing was in the offing, but at Windermere. Emily bit her lip. How was she to get word of a landing and almost as important, slipped out of the house in the dead of night and ride to the village? Do you know of anyone at Windermere we can trust? She asked Jeb, keeping her voice low. Jed pulled on his ear. Mrs. Spaulding's sister, Mrs. Easton, is the cook there. I expect she knows how to keep her mouth shut and would help us. Emily didn't like it, but time was passing, and she had to make a decision. As they stood there talking, a feeling of unease swept over her. She glanced around. There was the faintest breeze rattling the bare branches of the trees near the road, but even without leaves to obscure the view, the woods were full of shadows and odd patches of darkness. She saw nothing to alarm her, but unable to shake the feeling that they were being watched, she didn't linger and began to walk once more. When she spoke to Jeb, her voice was even lower than previously. Explain it all to Mrs. Gilbert immediately, she urged, and tell Mrs. Gilbert to talk to Mrs. Spaulding tomorrow. They agreed that Mrs. Easton would help us. Mrs. Spaulding can see her sister and make the arrangements. If Mrs. Easton will do it, she can find a way to let me know. And if we can trust her, Jeb asked, keeping step with her. "Then we'll have to think of something else," she admitted gloomily. "Hopefully, before your return, I will have discovered a way I can slip in and out of the house undetected," she half smiled. "And stealing a horse from Lord Jocelyn's barn shouldn't be beyond me. I'm sure they've had some of their animals borrowed before this." They continued walking shortly, rounding the curve that had hidden the stables from view. She noted the pair of saddle horses tied to the long rail in front of the stables, recognizing them as Lord Jocelyn's and Lamb's horses. Several yards from the long building, Emily stopped and asked rebukely, "Were you in Calais? Have you noticed very many people trying to get out of the country?" If he was surprised at her question, Jeb didn't show it. "I hear things, but I've never been approached." Emily hesitated and said in a rush, "Keep your ears open. Lord Jocelyn has a half-brother Lucien who is in France, now most likely be trying to get out of the country. It's possible he could be at Galati's." Jeb looked thoughtful. "I know a few people I can ask around." "Oh, Jeb, you are a darling," Emily exclaimed, beaming at him. "I know that Lord Jocelyn would pay you well if you are able to bring Lucien back with you. But if he's in Calais," Jeb went on, "there are other ports he might be in, and I can't go looking for him." Her smile faded. Emily nodded. "Now I'll say goodbye," Jeb said gruffly. "I've got a ship and crew to get ready to sail with the tide." She watched him disappear inside the stable, and it was only when he reappeared, mounted his horse, and with a wave rode off in the opposite way they had come, did she turn in the direction of the house. Even though she knew she had been gone longer than planned, Emily's step was reluctant. She should have been feeling relieved, and in many ways she was. Jeb's timely arrival had solved quite a few problems for her. He now had the funds for more contraband, and he would inform Mrs. Gilbert of her removal to Windermere. Tomorrow Mrs. Gilbert and Mrs. Spaulding would put their heads together. Hopefully Mrs. Easton would cooperate. But she was, she realized, for reasons that escaped her, dreading the removal to Windermere and being in debt to Lord Jocelyn. She made a face. She was being silly. In minutes she'd be on her way to one of the most impressive homes in Britain, the guest of a man whose very look did peculiar things to her heart. Just about any other woman in the neighborhood, she admitted violently, perhaps, even the whole of England would be over the moon to be in her shoes. Not one to repine, Emily straightened her shoulders and her reticule in one hand. She picked up one side of her skirt with the other and briskly set out toward the house. Reaching that stretch of road hidden from both the stables and the house, she had not gone more than a dozen steps before her pace faltered. The back of her neck prickled, and despite the long sleeves and the warmth of the amber merino wool dress she was wearing, she shivered. Scolding herself for being a goose, she took another step, but a sound behind her stopped in her tracks. Spinning around, she looked in that direction as Geoffrey on his bay gelding came crashing out of the forest and blocked the way to the stables. Her first reaction was one of astonishment, although not as much as there would have been if Jed had told her that Geoffrey and Answorth was seen this afternoon at the Gahoot place. In the flurry surrounding Jeb's arrival, she hadn't had time to think about Geoffrey and Answorth, not having gone to New Haven, but assuming the two men were still at the Godot farm, she hadn't been concerned. She certainly hadn't expected Geoffrey to suddenly appear before her. Feigning innocence, she said, "Geoffrey, what are you doing here? I thought you were going to New Haven today." Her cousin did not look well, and his expression was sullen as he muttered, "Changed my mind," conscious of the fleeting minutes and of the need to tell Barnaby and Cornelia Geoffrey's return. She said, "Ah, well, I'll be on my way." There was a rustle behind her. She whirled around, her heart leaping into her throat as Angela, astride his dapple gray, stepped out into the road, blocking her progress. It didn't escape her notice that she was trapped between the two men, or that they were unobserved from either the stables or the house on this stretch of road. Quelling the spasm of fear that clutched in her belly, reminding herself that they didn't know that Anne had escaped their clutches. Her clear gray gaze fixed on Answorth. She said firmly, "You are blocking my way, sir. Please move your horse." Answorth smiled nastily, and something in that smile sent an arrow of fright shooting right through her. With all Cornelia's dire warnings ringing in her ears, cursing herself for not paying more heed to her great aunt's petitions, Emily darted toward the thick patch of wood, hoping to lose herself in the tangle. She was unsuccessful, Anne's white horse leaped forward and his arm closed around her waist, jerking her off her feet. Her reticule dropped onto the road, twisting and kicking. Emily was roughly hauled onto his horse in front of him. She clawed at Anne's white hand at her waist, and he cursed as she drew blood. One hand holding the reins of his dancing horse, Ainsworth grasped her hair with the other and pulled her head back until she thought her neck would snap. His lips next to her ear, he panted, "I like a woman with spirit, but save your strength for when I have you in bed." Emily screamed with rage and, ignoring the pain, fought to escape his vicious grip, her body thrashing about atop the horse, unused to the unfamiliar weight, and violent moments on his back. The horse snorted and half bucked, and Ansgrave was nearly unseated. Forced to concentrate on his horse, his grip loosened on her hair. Emily took advantage of the moment and sprang free. Her feet hit the ground, and she stumbled to a run. But Answorth yelled to Geoffrey, "Grab the reins, you fool," and leaped from his horse right on her heels. With one hand he caught her shoulder and spun her around, his other hand drawn back into fists. He moved so fast she never even saw the blow that hit her. The last thing Emily remembered was a stunning shock of pain, and then there was only blackness. Why you torture that little